From professional services to responsibility sharing, a counterintuitive approach to customer reliability engineering. I'm Joshua Fox. I'm a senior cloud architect at Do It International. And that means that I help technology companies with their problems in Google Cloud and AWS, everything from defining their architecture to helping them with terrible system crashes. That's what I do. I have a bunch of certifications in both Google and AWS. I'm also a Google developer expert, which means I travel the world and talk about Google technologies. Although this one is not entirely about Google technologies, it's about the cloud. Let's talk about a case study of growth pains, something that we deal with, which is the best kind of pains to have. And a lot of companies in hypergrowth have to face this problem. So we'll talk about Siraxis Technologies, that is not the real name, a fintech software as a service. They were founded in 2016, and they've been doing very, very well since then. Exponential growth. You know, when you're undergoing exponential growth, it looks like nothing's happening. And then they say there's an elbow in the curve and you shoot up. Of course, that's not true. It's a derivative is quite continuous, but things were doing well, but they really got beautifully out of control around 2020 as the company started growing every single year, several fold. So they were having ×3 annual revenue, and that meant they were hiring a lot more people in line with that revenue. Also, their cloud costs went up perhaps 4 times, more than 3 times. This is happening year over year to this fintech company. And growing and growing and growing and growing. Does it ever stop? Let's see. Well, where it stops. Site reliability engineering. So when a system is growing so much, and when your customers are relying on it for financial technology, you've got to keep the system going. And the technique is called SRE, which means that you run your operations in the cloud using automation as much as possible. I'll get into more detail about what SRE means as compared to other methodologies. The team had a sysadmin background, so they're technically strong, but they started on-premises, which is very different working environment from the cloud. And just to understand these terms like sysadmin, we'll talk about SRE, we'll talk about other terms. Historically, sysadmin was one engineer working on this one machine, and I've seen people whose job was one database, not a very complicated database either, restarting when needed. If it's Windows, it's often through a GUI. Maybe I'm exaggerating. There were always very skillful people out there. But that's what the sysadmin used to be. And for on-prem, with only a few computers, that's fine. So, however, some of them had a more sophisticated background, moving into operations. Operations is like sysadmin, but with more computers and defining a work process, defining a workflow. So it's not just the one guy pressing restart on his Windows console. It's a run book. It's a system of working through the entire company where different engineers can collaborate. You know, it was said at the time that the sysadmins are going to lose their jobs, and maybe there will be only a very few people left. But what happened was that the number of computers being managed shot up, so that, yes, you need fewer sysadmins per computer, but there are far more virtual machines or other computing systems out there, whether it's databases, virtual machines, or anything else. And moving on in the history that these people, again, had experience with into DevOps. So DevOps pushes operations to the left, and it says that often the same people who do development are responsible all the way through to releasing, often with a continuous integration, so that when they write some code and push it, it gets tested all the way through and ready for deployment. So that's the next historical phase. When I say that they ran into trouble, you know, I don't mean that they lacked skills, but they did have this historical background, and we're going to show how they move forward and build the skills beyond that. Now, the next level, which I guess nowadays is the fashionable term, is SRE. So as they moved into the Google Cloud, they developed their financial system using a fire hose of data over PubSub with a Kubernetes cluster and all wrapped up in private networking for security, which is needed. Istio creating an internal service mesh. The details of this don't matter because this is more about how they organize themselves. But the point is that these are modern cloud technologies that require a different way of working. And SRE, what does SRE mean? Agile development methodology. In Agile, you're continually releasing. There's all sorts of subvariants of Agile, of course, but the key is that you're moving quickly, continually releasing, automating everything as much as possible. And in the case of SRE, it means that if something goes wrong, you figure it out and then you automate how to fix it the next time, how to keep that from happening the next time, so that you do not have the engineers at 3 a.m. pushing the restart button. And the team figured that out. They're working with that too. And they have these skills in-house. So they're building out and learning SRE and figuring out in-house how to work in the Google Cloud, even though their experience is mostly on premises. This is a journey that perhaps you've all done. In fact, maybe I'm telling you old things you all know, of course, as you've all been through many of these stages. But everything was looking good as they learned and learned and learned, but they still have more to learn. And the cloud is enormous. The cloud is almost like all computing is the cloud. So you cannot know it all. You just can't, even if you're super expert, you've learned all these different systems, there's always missing information and there's just too much to learn. And especially for people who, as I said, did have a background in on-prem, yes, they learned, but that's where their training, their experience mostly comes from. So this is where they hit the weaknesses of their weaknesses as they work with the cloud. And that's what I'm going to explain to you, how they overcome that. It is not easy. I know that I personally, in my background, was an architect on certain products. And of course, I learned certain technologies in great depth. I mean, I was in touch with the Google App Engine Flexible Environment team, telling them where their bugs were. I understood it better than them. So you could say, oh, I knew it in great depth. Yes, but how many technologies were we using in my company? 5, 10, I don't know, whatever the number was. There's no way you can comprehend all, whatever the number is, several hundred services available in Google Cloud or AWS, and furthermore, to comprehend them in depth. So as a company that's moving fast and wants to learn, they cannot learn fast enough to keep up with their very beautiful speed, their very beautiful growth. So one way to solve this problem is by hiring. And I'm not painting doom and gloom. There are people out there that you can hire, and they have skills. And Siraxis was able to hire people. But again, they know what they know. They have experience in a certain thing. They can learn other things. But you're not going to cover the full breadth of everything you might possibly need to know in the cloud just by hiring. There are some people out there who have this breadth, but they probably don't want to work for, just this one specific application. It becomes very, very hard to hire them in order to provide that coverage and give the team the breadth of knowledge that it needs. Okay, how do you resolve this? And because I am talking about learning and growth, we'll talk about a new microservice that Siraxis was building. So yes, they have to go to the next step. They have to learn more. And this is a financial analysis microservice. It's receiving a very fast stream of financial quotes over PubSub. And as I said, processing with the technologies Kubernetes, Istio service mesh, and taking care of a private networking. And they have to build this. So they cannot deal with the growth. It's just too much for them to handle. They can't hire fast enough on the top skilled people. So one solution, which they tried, was to hire outside professional services. Sounds good, because a ProServe company can, in theory, bring you the full breadth of skill across everything. Big enough, they can cover everything you could possibly know. So you buy the knowledge from the ProServe as they do this for you. Consultants are outsourcing. Somebody says they're a consultant, watch out, because often it means this is hands on keyboard, like you bought another body. Okay, that's a wonderful thing, valuable professional skill. But you have to think carefully what you mean by professional services. Does professional services mean a wise counselor that comes in and exactly fills in those blanks that you have in your company? Or does it mean warm bodies, which has a value in itself, but not necessarily in the top skills? So the ProServe does the first thing, which is to architect a beautiful solution using the cloud the way it needs to be used. And they do have the skills and the knowledge to do that well. And further, remember, this is a new microservice. Siraxis has already maxed out their abilities. So the ProServe deploys it, creates continuous integration, continuous deployment, which I mentioned CI under DevOps. CD, you can call it part of DevOps or not, it doesn't matter. But CD says that the developer pushes code to the master branch and a new version is released publicly, in production, automatically, several times a day. So that's the newest way to do it. It sounds scary when you're dealing with finances. I couldn't believe that it was even possible when I first heard about it. But it allows you much more velocity, and surprisingly, it allows a level of quality because it has to work right. You've made it so that, well, if it doesn't work right, you're in trouble, but it requires you to polish the automated system so that you don't have a person pushing the deploy button or something like that. So it requires the best of you. So that's what ProServe does. Now, as the next step, and here we're talking about all the phases of handling a production system, monitor and maintain it. So you can hire ProServe to do a 24/7 operations center, and they'll put people on the monitoring dashboard and deal with it. And further, as you know, all systems are live. There's no such thing as a static system. Whether it means there's a crash and you need to deal with it, whether it means there's a change in an underlying library and you need to change your own system to deal with the underlying services, or whether it means developing new versions and releasing them. Systems are always live and living things, so you can have ProServe do that for you too. Well, you can probably guess I'm going to tell you the problems. I just said three things that ProServe can do. But what are the problems with it? First of all, it's expensive because you're paying the salaries plus the overhead, and they have to make a profit margin, management, negotiation, statement of work, project managers. So you pay a steep overhead for the flexibility of being able to pull in that expertise from an outside company. And hundreds of dollars per hour, depending on the skill level of the individual who you're hiring. But money is actually not at the center of what I'm talking about here. One important point is that they do a less than thorough job, and Siraxis asked for that. Siraxis has an incentive to tell them to do a bad job. Why? Because it just costs so much, and everybody knows that. So get a system working. That's enough. Stop charging us more. Everybody understands why that's a problem. There's no doubt about it. But what choice do they have? They can't tell them to keep polishing it forever. It's not even clear what that means, to keep polishing it forever. So you get a system that just barely works. And that's what happens when you have an outside team who takes any sort of responsibility for something that really belongs to the company. The next issue involves skill set. So it's famous that you negotiate and then you talk to the senior architect. And then as soon as they come on, well, you've got the lower skilled people. And you know what? That's not a trick. Siraxis, the customer wants that in a way, because they don't want to pay the top hourly rate or anything like that. So I just introduced this as saying that they have a skill gap. And they're not really going to fill the skill gap. They'll get people who've been trained in the specific technology, what's needed. But if you dream of covering the cloud, well, you're not going to get people who have that breadth of knowledge working on a regular basis to fill in with that depth of experience and wisdom. And this also means that the experts are less available. Previously, I just said you have the people who are less expert and architects disappeared. You don't want to pay that. But on a more practical level, if I need an expert, I'm willing to pay. There's no way that they can be allocated by their management to, unless you really spend a lot of money, they can be allocated by their management to be available to you when you need them, as you need them. And further, when I say available, that could mean, please schedule us a meeting tomorrow, but it could mean 24/7 things are going down. Nobody has any idea why, including all of these people sitting at the network operated center. We need a true expert. It's just not possible. The finances don't work out that way. So I just said a bunch of problems with this model, but we've now built up to the single worst one, and that is responsibility. When you develop a system, you care about it, you fix the bugs. Professionally, you care. People do care about their work, including the professional service people. But the question is, whose mind is this sitting on? By the way, we get an echo here. Yeah? Maybe there's another audio in the room. Should put a mute. Something. All right, or maybe even take it out of the room or something. I don't know. Okay, so when you build something and you care about it, let's imagine the folks are people, they're professionals, they really care about their work. But Siraxis knows nothing about it. It's not enough to have a knowledge handoff. We know that doesn't work. Yes, you talk to somebody, you have a meeting, you have a document, but that depth of understanding of this is why things are working as they are only occurs when you or your team is hands-on, building, responsible for every stage, from development through deployment, through to monitoring, handling incidents, maintenance. So that is actually the single most important point I have to make that we're going to think about in a minute. Now that I've built you up to that, let's talk about the other way. CRE, Customer Reliability Engineering Advisors. What they don't do makes the difference. So the key here is going to be certain things that the outside advisors refuse to do, even if you pay them for it. They're not going to do that for you, no matter how much you want that. And Siraxis actually was able to move forward by having people who would not do certain things for them. So let's talk about how that works. Customer Reliability Engineering. So CRE is a term made up by Google. Maybe they invented SRE too, I don't know. And as always, the term means different things for different, it doesn't matter what other people think it means, but Google used the term CRE to mean they would help you with your cloud. Like they're hands-on, they'd actually do work at no charge, but you'd have to commit to Google level quality, which is actually very expensive. We all like quality, but that's expensive to really polish your system up to that level. But okay, if that works for you, then that's what Google would do in some cases for some select customers. That's one meaning of CRE. Another meaning that some companies use is pretty much what I already said a few minutes ago, which is that they just do hands-on work. So that's not what I'm talking about today by this phrase, Customer Reliability Engineering. And actually, this is embodied by my graphic here, where you see that Siraxis is closer to the cloud system. CRE is hovering out there behind them. They're not between the customer and the system, but rather the customer is working with the system and CRE is outside and advising. Here is what a list of what they do and don't do. So the CRE advisors will review architecture, design, or even problems in a running system, discuss it with the customer. Siraxis, what have you found? What are your questions? What are your problems? They'll analyze. They'll say, I'm looking at your architecture. Maybe you should do it differently. I'm looking at your crash system in production. Here I'm figuring out where the problem is with you. And then they will suggest to Siraxis how to fix it. All that's cool, but here's what they don't do. They never author anything. The CRE will never author anything, never implement anything, never deploy anything, and never fix any problems. Let's see what that looks like in more detail. Of course, you may have heard of the shared responsibility model. So I think AWS invented the term. They say AWS is responsible for the cloud and the customer is responsible for things running in the cloud. So that's a good way to think about it. And then it's important to see the CRE as kind of standing in the middle, on the side, but in the middle, saying use or access are working in the cloud. You don't understand the cloud, which AWS or Google is responsible for. We'll help you connect to the cloud, mentally connect to the cloud, potentially connect to the Google or AWS team as well. Yeah, but still not being that intermediary, but still not hands-on. Everybody loves the term hands-on. Sounds nice. But sometimes it's better not to be. So the CRE will not implement any code at all, not any YAML, maybe for a POC, you can send a snippet of code that just says, here's an example. But it's not meant to run. You're not meant to use it. It's just a way of communicating. No code at all, ever. The CRE do not touch infrastructure. So you give them read-only permission because they have to see your systems, find the problem. But absolute, if Siraxis is under stress, things are going down, something's very complicated to fix, and they say to the CRE, just go fix it, it'll take you a minute. No, absolutely not. Very important to have that permission that's blocked. You can make corporate policies, say for security. We absolutely refuse to take write permissions, and that is not just for security. It is security, but not just that. So no one likes to talk about refusing to do work, but in fact, this is a very collaborative model because it says that the people who do the job are going to be SRE from the customer. And the CRE advisors from the outside has got to work with them. It could be email, a ticketing system, and video calls where you can jump on and do screen sharing, effectively do things together, but not doing them together, the CRE is telling or advising the SRE what to do. So this is, because each one has a definite responsibility in the shared responsibility model, everyone benefits as they collaborate. An advantage here, an advantage of this system is that SRE gets the best people and they themselves become the best. Oh, Siraxis in this case got top experts. That means that they can talk to architects who know the cloud, side to side, backwards, forwards. And as I said earlier, that's not really practical if you have armies of lower skilled people doing the implementation for you. This is just a small team of advisors, of consultants, and they're on tap as needed. But let us not forget the CRE advisors themselves. Note the smile on their faces, because they have the opportunity to share their knowledge, share their experience, and not be responsible. That doesn't sound good to others. But yes, Siraxis has responsibility. Meanwhile, CRE's responsibility is to make Siraxis happy, to guide them through, to solve them for it. So it puts, everybody gets stressed out, but it makes sure that the CRE people have that responsibility of helping. And also it makes them happy because they do get that to explore that breadth of knowledge across that they may have built up over many years of experience. These are top people. As I said earlier, if Siraxis tried to hire these people, some super expert, this person will be working on PubSub, Kubernetes, as I said earlier, just these few technologies, which people on that level maybe don't want them. Everybody enjoys different things, right? But this gives the CRE happy. If people are happy, then the other people are happy too. SRE of Siraxis is building the skills. They never say to somebody else, you do it. They say, I'm doing it. I'm responsible. They are responsible. It's their company that's going down after all. They're the ones with the employee stock options. So because they learn hands-on as they are guided by CRE, everything they do is a learning opportunity. And they're growing their own team to get that depth of knowledge in the cloud that they just wouldn't have otherwise. So, and to talk when somebody's pitching their great idea, right? Like I'm telling you this great idea, it's important to say what the limitations are. You got to be good. Siraxis team has to be top skilled technologists themselves. I said they came from on-prem, they learned the cloud, but they have to be engineers who can take responsibility for everything. This is not going to work if you have a team of people with no skills, because the CRE can only tell them what to do. And ultimately, you need to have the professional ability and insight to do it yourself, yes, with some help and guidance. So that is a strong limitation on how this system can work. It probably won't work for a lot of companies for that reason. Probably only technology companies and not old line companies that you basically what we call digital native. The benefit is that the system stays in the hand of SRE because it's theirs, because they're going to have to suffer the on-call when it goes down forever. They do a thorough job. And they understand the trade-off. Sometimes you can't do a perfect job, but that's a trade-off too, that they absolutely understand with no need to negotiate, but rather based on their company needs. You get a much higher quality system by breaking that additional chain of communication and passing the buck. Another advantage is that top people can be available 24/7. When all you're doing is calling them for occasional advice and not to work down in the code mines, then it requires less of their time, and therefore they can have that flexibility of being available when things go down at 3 a.m. on a Sunday, especially if their CRE team is spread out all over the world. And ownership, as you understand, stays in-house forever. That sense of deep professional caring about the system. The only person to get angry about the bugs is yourself or your teammates. So that's what happens when you keep the responsibility in-house. The cost is far, far lower, of course. I told you why ProServe is expensive. Actually, we at Doit don't charge anything, which is incredible. But that's because the Google or Amazon gives us a big wholesaler discount on cloud on the fact that our customers buy the cloud through us. They basically don't pay anything at all, actually. So it's much lower cost, but that was only possible for Google and AWS to do that because, as I said, it is cheaper than ProServe. Otherwise, there's no way they could fund that, as it were. Well, the disadvantages of the CRE model. Let's walk through an incident of rapid response and see how we handle that. The other half is designing architecture. That's another thing, but we'll talk about incident response. The system is down. Traffic is not arriving at the Kubernetes cluster. Something's wrong with it. Istio maybe, but nobody can figure out why. Yes, these people built it. They're not the world's greatest Istio experts. And 5 minutes. Okay, so how are they going to handle that? So first of all, they try to analyze for root cause and they're not able to do it. So as you know, with incident management, you have a person who's in charge of the incident, communication to the CEO, to the customers, but also in this case, they use the runbook and they open a request to the CRE. And because of the read-only permissions, which I mentioned, the CRE is able to immediately start to analyze in parallel to SRE. SRE has no time to talk to anyone, but they will in a minute because they've each had a look at the logs, at the monitoring tools, and they get on a screen share call. And at this point, the CRE is able to say, you forgot about this monitoring tool. Did you even know that you have this metric? Did you know that Google Kubernetes Engine has this built-in dashboard that you can use? And together, they explore the data in a screen share and go into depth. And at this point, they see that there was a misconfigured YAML configuring the outward-facing Istio service. It's actually pretty simple, but it's always scary to deploy into production. So they discuss it together. And then, of course, the last arrow is just Siraxis, who actually does the fix. If they need to, they can ask in a screen share, please look at what I'm doing. But once it's been explained, they can probably handle that. SRE comes out of there with the thing that they most wanted, which is to handle the crash. But also, they come out with knowledge that they now know what happened, what to do better next time, how to work with that. So great talking to you. And we'll be taking questions at the end, I think. That's what I was told. Is that right?